Identify with the difficulty by rehearsing your own difficulty. Here's one of the best clues in learning to better identify. Go back over your own life and make a study of your own life, your circumstances, your feelings, your awareness. Some of the stories you haven't told for a long time. Some of the experiences you've had. Now, sometimes when you've freshly come from an experience, it isn't that easy to translate it and it isn't that easy to talk about it. But as the time passes and you can take a more thoughtful approach to your experiences, the key is not to lose the intensity of it, but to become more educated in using the intensity of your experiences to weave into the next conversation. And by the gift of language and emotion, touch somebody's life, reach somebody, affect somebody, persuade somebody. Identification. Very important subject. Here's the next part of a good presentation. It's what we call logic and reason. If you're trying to persuade a child, talk to a child, or talk to an audience, or if you're trying to talk to a customer, part of any presentation is the logical part, the facts and the figures, and the numbers and the dimensions. And we won't linger too long here because here's my point on logic and reason. It's got to be brief. We need some facts, but only enough facts to start the decision-making process. You got to beware not to cover too many facts. I'm sure we've all heard the expression, it's possible to talk somebody into buying, keep on talking, talk them out of buying. Here's where this problem usually occurs. Even if it's a child, you can talk a child into deciding, and then you keep on talking, and then they undecide. We talk past. Too much logic, too much reason. We need just enough logic and reason so that it starts to make sense, not so that you understand it all. If you walk into the new car showroom and express an interest in an automobile, salesman comes along and says, "Let me tell you about this car." You say, "Okay." He says, "Follow me." And he takes you out back into the shop. And he opens up the shop manual on the car and says, "Let's start with the left front wheel." Right away, you would say, "Hold it, hold it." He says, "This is going to take a long time. We've got 1,000 facts here to go through." You'd say, "Hold it, hold it. You don't need 1,000 facts to decide about this automobile. How many facts do you need?" "About a half dozen." And if somebody makes the mistake of going beyond a half dozen, here's what they're going to do: lose their audience. So you got to make sure you don't get into too wide range of facts and logic. Because here's why. Most decisions are made emotionally. We need just enough logic so that it makes sense, but we're going to do it probably out of emotion. So the key is to be brief. With logic, reasons, facts. Because too much of anything is too much, right, at one time. What if you sat down to a steak dinner and you were real hungry, so you cleaned it all up? What if they cleared that away and brought you another one? Well, let's say you're real hungry, so you go for the second one. What if they cleared that away and brought you the third one? See, that third one doesn't look good. In fact, if you start on it, you'll probably lose the whole thing, right? I mean, too much is too much. So, brevity on logic and reason. It needs to be powerful, it needs to be factual, but brief. Number 3, learning to attack the problems. It's so important to mount a precise attack on the problems. Because one of the best ways to help somebody in communication is learn to attack the problem, to attack what's wrong. But here's the refinement of the skill that leaders must have. To attack the problem, but not the person. We also express this particular part called attack and confess. One of the best ways to attack something is to confess you've had the problem. Use yourself as example 1. Then use some others we call third party. Let me tell you about Mary. If Mary was here, she would confess, but she isn't here, so I'll confess for her. She put it off. She had the problem. And if she was here, she might even try to persuade you with tears. Right? We call that third party. But one of the best is to use party 1, called you, to attack the problems. Now, what are some of the things that need to be attacked? Let me just give you some examples. It's a pretty long list, but we'll have to just be sufficiently satisfied with a few, and you can continue these studies on your own. Procrastination. That's a good one, front and center. We've got to attack procrastination because it's so insidious. It eats up such large chunks of your life and leaves you in a small corner. Putting it off. Delaying. Letting it slide. Now, I'm one of the best to attack procrastination because I confess to being one of the all-time great procrastinators. I've done a lot of things, but I've put a lot of things off. Procrastination. I am so good, I could teach it. Procrastination. I can show you how to do it so it don't show. I mean, I'm so good. I'm so good. But I also know the pain of procrastination. I also know the regret that comes from procrastination. I can also show you pieces of my life missing, never to be repaired, because I let it slide. Now see, if we all studied our own lives, and we're trying to help somebody with this insidious disease of procrastination and putting it off, front and center, we use ourselves as best example, because you feel the strongest about your own experiences and your own emotions. Do you think you could help somebody with procrastination? Developing this skill of going back, rehearsing your own life, and coming up with the essence of the emotion and the experience to try to illustrate to somebody how insidious it can become and how devastating it can leave your life and what will be missing if you let it slide. That's what we call learning to attack the problem. Now, underline the word attack. It's very important to go after the insidious. The great leader of the Christians says, "The things I once hated I now love. The things I once loved I now hate." It's so important to incorporate both love and hate in the same conversation. Now, let me give you the dilemma. This stuff isn't easy. It's so easy to be careless with words and get the wrong reaction. What if you meant to say, "What's troubling you?" and instead you said, "What's wrong with you?" Can you imagine the difference? Just the mistake of one small word means all the difference in the world in the kind of reaction that you get. But here's the dilemma. To attack the problem but not the person. God's got the same dilemma. God says, "I love you, but I hate your sinful ways." Now see, that's a challenge. To show somebody that you love them but you hate. How do you put love and hate in the same sentence? I'm telling you, it is essential to show your contempt for the problem and your concern for the value. These are not easy skills. You don't walk these summits of intellectual thought and word choice and emotional content and precision. You don't learn these overnight. But your commitment to excellence in communications can make all the difference in the world in how your economic and social and personal world works out. And here's part of the challenge. God says, "I love you, but I hate your sinful ways." Now, since me and my sinful ways are bound up so close together, I tend to take that personal. And God has to say, "No, no, no, let me make it clear one more time. I love you, but I hate your sinful ways." See, we've got to make that clear. You've got to make it clear to your children. I love you, but I hate what you're doing and what it's doing to you. So you've got to learn to put love and hate in the same sentence and to make the insidious as devastating and as ominous as it should be and make the opportunity as bright as it can be. But we've got to learn to paint by language and by emotions how much we hate the wrong in order to develop the good. And this is some stuff you can't be mild with. See, you can't take the mild approach to the weeds in your garden. You've got to hate weeds bad enough to go kill them. You say, "Well, I've learned to handle this stuff." This is not stuff you handle. This is stuff you devastate. This is stuff you've got to kill. If something is going after some treasure and some value, you've got to go after it with a high, hateful attempt by word, by language, by emotions, whatever is necessary to get the job done to illustrate the evil and the possibility of good. Now, these are not easy skills. But if you want to extend your reach, in my opinion, you just have to engage in the confrontation. It's where the values are. Let me give you a good philosophical phrase. All values must be won by contest. All values must be won by contest. And after they've been won, they must be defended. You say, wow, you've put a pretty heavy task on us. That's what life is all about, a pretty heavy challenge. We don't give large trophies for small effort. If you want to win high health, if you want to win high wealth, if you want to extend a long reach in touching people's lives, you got to engage in some of these extra powerful disciplines. And one is to secure the territory by vigor, and the other is to defend it with equal challenge. Attack. Procrastination. Here's another good one. Blame. I engaged in this the big share of my life until I met Mr. Show. I used to blame my negative relatives. I used to blame the government. I used to blame taxes. I used to blame prices. I said, it costs too much. Shoaff said, no, let's cover the real problem. You can't afford it. I thought, wow. I never looked at it like that before. Shoaff said, sir, you must intellectually understand, it's not it that's your problem. It's you that's your problem. It's not out there that's the problem. Out there is like it's been for 6,000 years. You can't cure that. But what you can cure is errors in judgment, errors in attitude, errors in activity, errors in misjudging results. I found that the errors were within. But see, he had to go after me on that point. Here's the next one. Excuses. Wow. We've got a million. I'm too short. I'm too tall. I'm too old. I'm too young. I don't have the money. I don't have the experience. On and on and on with the excuses. Learning to attack. Very important. Now here's what we call tools of last resort. Here's part of the attack you can use. And if you learn these skills, no telling who you can help. But you must save these for what we call tools of last, underline last resort. These are some things you don't use up front. Here's the first one, a direct attack. You've got to be very careful of a direct attack so that it not be misjudged in severity. Next is scolding. Got to be very careful of scolding. You only use it as a last resort. Somebody walks in late, you say, where have you been? See, that's loaded with insinuations. Loaded. You got to be very careful. Only use it as a last resort. If you have to resort to it, you have to, but don't use it up front. Okay, we call save these. Save these for when the occasion calls for such harsh language to go after something. And the last one is sarcasm. Sarcasm can be useful, but you got to save it. Who do you think you are? See, that's powerful language, but you got to save it for when it is meaningful to use such powerful language. Matters of the heart are delicate. Here's what we teach. Don't operate on the heart with a hatchet. When you use these tools, you got to be very careful to save the value and go after the problem. Now let me give you the real clue. The more you care, the stronger you can be. People don't mind you using strong language about insidious things. They don't mind you becoming sharp, powerful. As long as you care, and the more you care, the stronger you can be. I don't mind a minister consigning my soul to hellfire for my sinful ways. I don't mind that, as long as he does it with tears and not with joy. But wouldn't we all resist a dry-eyed sermon on hellfire? You can't preach hellfire without your heart breaking. You got to sob your way through a sermon on hellfire. Or we all would resist a dry-eyed attempt to preach on hellfire. Why? A simple, obvious lack of really caring. And there are some subjects you cannot even deal with unless your heart breaks and unless visibly it shows by the emotional content that you really care. Now you can deal harshly with some powerful, important problems. Tools of last resort. Attacking the problems, but not the person. Just by way of review, we've been covering the major parts in a presentation, whether it's to a child or a business audience or a sales situation. All of us have the opportunity to affect somebody with words. And we talked about making the presentation. It comes in 4 parts. Number 1, identification. Learning how to relate to somebody else, which is pretty easy if somebody's like you, pretty difficult if somebody's not like you. There's a difference in color, a difference in religion, a difference in age, a difference in experience, background. It gets a little more complicated, but it can be mastered. And all you have to do is refine these skills to have a longer reach, economically, socially, personally. Deal in subjects that make you real. Tell your story with authority. Next is the logic and reason part. Not too many facts. There's probably about 1,000 facts about an automobile, but you don't need them all to make a decision. About a half a dozen will do. And if you stretch it beyond the half dozen, it's pretty easy to lose your audience. So, brief on logic and reason. Number 3 was learning to attack the problems, but not the person. Number 4, in making the presentation, solution. So we've got identification, logic, attacking the problems, and offering solution. This is what we call solutions. Painting results in advance. This is an exciting part about the human experience, the ability to paint results in advance. We call it borrowing from the future. One of the reasons for living is to borrow from the future. If you can't see the future, it makes today pretty desperate. If you can't see the future, it makes your steps uncertain. Why bother to learn the skills and pay the price and go through all of the calisthenics and all of the trials of learning and growing and changing if you can't see the future? If there is no future, if there is no promise. So this is one of our great challenges, to do 2 things. 1, paint for ourselves the future, results in advance, borrowing from the future. But when you stop to think about it, that is a tremendous, unique experience. Being able to borrow from the future, bring it to the present, and use it as an incentive to go get the job done, to learn the skills and put those skills to work. So painting results in advance, whether it's money results, whether it's position results, possibilities, opportunities, putting the person you're talking to in the future position, I can see you now, solutions. And it can be very powerful. Very powerful. What makes the farmer work all spring and toil all summer? His vision of the harvest. If he couldn't see the harvest, he wouldn't put the plow in the ground. If he couldn't visualize the opportunity, the chance to cash in and to turn wheat into money and money into lifestyle, if you couldn't see all of this, why would you put the plow to the soil? And the answer is, of course, why? If you can't see, why labor? And if the promise isn't clear, why put out the effort? So one of the ways to get people to respond, to put out the effort, to read the books, make the decisions, whatever it is you want them to do, part of the key is to offer the solution and be able to paint it in no uncertain terms. Jesus said to his disciples one day, if you'll stick with me and plant the roots deep in our Christian ideology, this philosophy, he said, if you will walk the streets, if you'll pour your heart and soul into this enterprise, if you will touch every human you can touch, if you'll cross the oceans, if you will fling yourself on the known world, and it isn't going to be easy, spreading the ideas, spreading what we've been going through the last 3.5 years. He said it isn't going to be an easy task, but he said, I promise you, after you have finished this rather difficult task of putting all of your energy, time, and effort into the enterprise, he said, I promise you, when it's finished, in my Father's house are many mansions. Wow. See, that's clever. He put the mansion shot on him. No wonder they walk the streets. All you have to do is read the book of the activities. And they crossed the oceans, they walked the streets, they touched every human they could touch. They put every ounce of energy and mind and soul and spirit into this philosophy. And they did it right up until the time they forfeited their life, most of them, for the opportunity. No wonder it's lasted for 2,000 years. But the enterprise also had the promise. And wouldn't you put out some effort if somebody that was credible told you about such a unique promise? And the answer is, of course. All we have to do is to see the promise clearly enough, and we will do some amazing things. Passion, emotion, beliefs, convictions. If you can learn to articulate those well, if you'll learn to let that flow, not just from the surface, but from down deep, from a lifetime of experience, if you'll draw from all of those feelings and commitments and awareness, even with some misgivings, even with not knowing it all, even with a sense of humility, but it's that flow of emotion that finally now seals the point in the final art of persuasion. Now let's engage in a very exciting subject called the art of persuasion. Let me give you some notes to take, because I found there's a great deal of difference between presentation and persuasion. When I first got into sales, I became a pretty good presenter. Show taught me well. I used to hear people say, I've listened to a lot of salesmen, but you've got to be one of the best. I thought, wow, the man has taught me well. Somebody else would say, hey, I've been around, I think I've heard them all, but wow, you've got to be the best. You're one of the greatest salesmen I've ever heard. And I thought, wow, I've learned this stuff pretty quickly. Then one day the awful truth dawned on me. I thought, hey, wait a minute. Something's wrong here. If I'm one of the world's all-time great salesmen, how come they ain't buying? Wow. It started to dawn on me that I had an additional skill to learn. I got very good at presentation. I had yet to get good at persuasion. There were two great orators of antiquity. One was Demosthenes. He was a Greek. The other was Cicero. Cicero was a Roman. And they were both great speakers. But it was said of Cicero, when he spoke, everybody said, what a great speech. It was said of Demosthenes, when he spoke, everybody said, let us march. And that's the difference between presentation and persuasion. I'm asking you to learn this additional skill. We call you a good persuader if now the results start to follow. If something starts to happen, if people decide, if they actually do something about your presentation, if they do something about your appeal, if something happens, now we know you have truly become what we call a persuader. So let's talk about the art of persuasion and what all it entails. Let me give it to you. Here's number one. Be a good storyteller. If you're involved in a company that deals in numbers and business and products and volume of business, make sure you translate all the business into stories. Sometimes it's easy to say, we did $10 million in business last month. And then we forget the stories that are involved in that 10 million. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Become story conscious as well as figure conscious. How many stories does $10 million represent? And if you're only interested in the numbers and not the stories, you'll be limited in your future skills of communication. Try to translate activity and business and volume and money and numbers into people's lives and stories and who all is involved in the transactions. Okay? Now here's another key. Become your own best storyteller. Learn to tell your own story. Whether it's identification, logic, solutions. Be a student of your own life. It's so important to go back over your own life. It's good to review at the end of the day your experiences of the day. We call it learning to reflect. One of the keys of making the past more valuable to invest it in the future is learning how to reflect. And let me give you some good times to reflect. One is at the end of the day. Take a few minutes at the end of the day and go back over your day. Who did you see and who did you meet and who did you talk to and what happened? Why did they say what they said and why did you say what you said? We call it running the tapes again. And if you'll take a few minutes at the end of a day and run the tapes of the day again, that day will take a more important place in your equity future. You'll be able to draw from that day. But if you casually go through the day, and then if you casually miss the opportunity to lock that day into your consciousness, sure enough, at some future time when you could have drawn from that experience, it won't be available. Here's how to lock in your past and make it more of an equity. Number 2, take a few hours at the end of the week to go back over a week. A week is a pretty good chunk of time. The sights and the sounds and the colors and the people and the decisions and the mistakes and the errors and the successes. Just go back and review that week and let that week take a more powerful place in your awareness. A half a day at the end of the month. A month is really a good chunk of time. We wouldn't let a company go by without taking a look at least in 30 days. You can't be casual about taking a look. Somebody says, well, let's let the company go a few years and then we'll take a look. Say, no, you can't wait a few years. That would be too late. You could be so far off track. Now, I'm asking you not to let your life go more than about 30 days without taking a serious look at the numbers and what you've done and what you've said and how you've grown and your experiences, so that one more 30-day period takes a stronger place in your life. Take a weekend at the end of the year called Time to Reflect. Why? To make the past more valuable. If you treat it so, experiences can become commodity, currency, coin. Now, why try to make the past more valuable? Here's the simple answer: to invest it in the future. When my father was about to turn 76 years old, I said to him, dear Father, can you imagine the incredible experience that's waiting for you to gather up the last 75 years of your life and invest them into your 76th? See, that's a lot different awareness than just trying to make it through one more year. Let me offer you this challenge: to gather up more of your past and invest it in your future. And part of it is studying your own story, because your own story could be so powerful in identifying and offering answers and solutions. No telling what, if you took a little time, you could uncover that you just haven't talked about for a long time. If you were to dig back, no telling what additional stories and experiences you could reawaken, so that when the opportunity came, you could draw from that experience and invest it into that conversation, and no telling who you could touch. And without it, it might be a touch you couldn't make and a reach for which you're too short. Stories, your story, other people's stories. What a great way to illustrate fact and ideas and philosophy is to use the stories of life, because that's the real stuff of life, the stories of life. All right, here's number 2 in the art of persuasion. Accurate facts. Accurate facts. We call it dealing in truth. Accuracy is very important. Here's why. It builds credibility. Credibility starts to weaken if you mess with the facts, the truth, the correct numbers. Now, everybody will give you room for what we call an unintentional error in dealing in facts. Now, see, if my watch says about 7:28, but if you were to ask me what time is it, and I was to say it's 7:30, you would allow me to be a couple of minutes off, right? If I said it was 7:30, but accurately, really, truthfully, it was 7:28, you would give me that error to just quickly say 7:30, right? You would say, you didn't mean to mess up my life, right? By leading me astray with this erroneous information that it was 7:30 when really it was only 7:28. Now, there are times and occasions when you may have to be precise, and it may be a life and death matter, who knows. But in generally speaking, people will give you room for making what we call an unintentional error in stating what we call the truth. But beyond a sort of reasonableness of unintentional error, an area that is what we call in higher circles unacceptable. Some people deal in exaggeration, and it starts to destroy their credibility. If you're giving testimony in a trial, and you're on the witness stand, if they catch you in one lie, guess what they do with the rest of your testimony? They throw it all away. Why? You have destroyed your credibility. The guy says, well, no, I only lied just that one time. Well, how are we going to believe that? All it takes is one to now weaken your whole testimony, right? So here's part of the key in the art of persuasion. Dealing in truth. Dealing in fact. Here's what we call true sophistication. A total absence of exaggeration.